This is my 150th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. Back in part 143, I unboxed a Hornby Coronation Scot train pack from their 2012 catalogue, and I then proceeded to spend that video and 2 subsequent parts, part 144 and part 149, dealing with the vagaries of Hornby's models of streamlined coronation class locomotives and trying to get those models to actually run without derailing or otherwise malfunctioning. In this part, I'm finally going to do what I set out to do in part 143, talk about the history of the coronation class locomotives and the Coronation Scot train, and run a model Coronation Scot train. The Princess Coronation class represent the ultimate evolution of William Stanier's Pacific Passenger Express locomotives. What is a Pacific locomotive, and why did they become the ultimate form of British passenger express engines in the 1930s, at least for the LMS and the LNER? Well, I apologise to those who already know all of this, but I'm going to go about answering these questions before I get to the specifics of the coronations themselves. When steam locomotives were first created, they had a single pair of driving wheels which were driven directly by the rods from the steam cylinders. Generally, these earliest locomotives had just one other pair of wheels, either behind the driving wheels as here, or in front of them. Throughout much of the 19th century, a single pair of driving wheels remained fairly standard. However, the advantage of adding additional wheels to spread the load of the locomotive's weight better over the rails became apparent and indeed vital. The engine seen here, a broad gauge locomotive, has 4 wheels in front of the driving wheels and 4 wheels behind the driving wheels. An arrangement of this type would be notated as 4-2-4 according to the White notation of wheel arrangement. However, that notation didn't come into use until the early 20th century, well after this loco was made. The White notation of wheel arrangement consists of 3 numbers separated by dashes. The central number indicates the number of driving wheels, with the first number indicating the number of wheels in front of the driving wheels, and the last number indicating the number of wheels behind the driving wheels. So 4-2-4 for this loco. The driving wheels on this engine are extremely large to allow the loco to attain higher speeds. The larger the driving wheels are, the further the loco will travel along the track for a single reciprocation of the steam cylinders, assuming that things don't break or slip and that the cylinders provide enough power to keep the train moving. Express locomotives continued to have large driving wheels throughout the steam era, although not generally quite as large as this. Freight locomotives tended to have smaller driving wheels in order to provide greater pulling power at the expense of speed. Engines with only a single pair of driving wheels did continue to operate well into the 20th century. However, they were becoming increasingly obsolete. This is my model of the Caledonian Single, a unique engine built for the Caledonian Railway in 1886. When this locomotive was withdrawn from service by the LMS in 1935, it was the last locomotive operating anywhere on British rails having only a single pair of driving wheels. Hence it's being referred to as the last single-wheeler. This loco would be designated 4-2-2 according to the White system. This is my model of the improved Precedent class. These engines were developed by the LNWR towards the end of the 19th century. As you can see, this class has 2 pairs of driving wheels coupled together by conrods. With a single pair of wheels in front of the driving wheels, the White designation of this class would be 240. These engines were premier passenger express locos in the 1880s, when they played a principal role in the races to the north, the competition between companies to provide the fastest passenger service between London and Scotland. competition that would rear its head again later, after a period of agreed-on truce. By the time of the General Amalgamation of 1923, which combined all of Britain's railway companies into four, the so-called Big Four, the most common wheel arrangement for passenger express locomotives was 440, as seen here. This is a kit-built model of the LNWR George V class. I was pleased to be able to obtain this model, as this class has never been available as a commercially made, ready-to-run model in 00 gauge. A better-known 440 class is the Midland 4P compound, seen here in a hand-modified version based on a Hornby model. This class has been widely available in 00 gauge. This is an example of the sister Midland 2P class. The 4P class had one internal high-pressure cylinder and two external low-pressure cylinders, the combination of sequential high and low-pressure cylinders being what the compound designation means. The 2P class were not compound engines and had only two internal cylinders, giving them less power, hence the lower 2P power classification. However, the classes shared the 440 wheel arrangement and were similar in many respects. Here's a Hornby model of a Midland 4P compound. When the Midland Railway was amalgamated into the LMS in 1923, these were the Midland's premier passenger express locomotives. And in the early days of the LMS, locomotive policy tended to be dominated by Midland ideas, so the Midland's small locomotive policy prevailed to some degree. However, it was already becoming evident that larger and more powerful locomotives would be required, especially to pull heavy passenger trains on the Western Main Line, which was the LMS's main route between London and Scotland and which had some seriously severe gradients. In fact, at the time of amalgamation in 1923, the LNWR were already running locomotives with the 460 wheel arrangement on the Western Main Line. This is a picture of a member of the Claughton class, which were the premier passenger express locos of the LNWR at the time of amalgamation. I feel that it's a crying shame that no ready-to-run model of the Claughton class has ever been made in 00 gauge, and a model of a Claughton class locomotive is my number one want for my own 00 gauge collection. Quite soon after amalgamation, other 460 locos were developed by the LMS, chiefly for running on the Western Main Line. The Royal Scot class was launched in 1927, and despite some early teething troubles went on to become very successful. The locos of this class are particular favourites of mine, partially at least because I know that my grandfather, my dad's dad, drove these in the latter stages of his career with the Midland and the LMS before his retirement in the 1930s. Here's one of my models of the Royal Scot class, running as HLI, which stands for Highland Light Infantry. This was originally a mainline model of the Loco Old Contemptibles, but I renamed and renumbered it. Even before the Royal Scot class was created, the LMS had been thinking about building a Pacific Express engine, that is, one with a 462 wheel arrangement. But those initial plans were put aside when a GWR 460 loco on loan proved very successful on the Western Main Line. And so the Royal Scot class was born, but really it was only a matter of time before Pacific engines would come into their own on the highly graded Western Main Line. William Stanier, later Sir William, became the chief mechanical engineer of the LMS in 1932. Stanier was responsible for the design of perhaps the most successful 460 locomotive ever, the Black 5, but that class was intended for mixed traffic, freight and some passenger service. It wasn't intended to pull the premier passenger express trains. For those duties, Stanier did indeed create Pacific locos, first with the Princess Royal class in 1933. Here's my model of the second locomotive of that class, Princess Elizabeth, in an older Hornby tooling. Here's another member of the class, Princess Victoria, in Hornby's latest tooling for this class. You can clearly see here why the 462 wheel arrangement was required for this class. The large tapered boiler reaches all the way back to the rear pair of driving wheels, meaning that the cab and most of the firebox are behind the driving wheels, hence the need for a pony truck to support the back of the engine. Stanier went on to enlarge and improve on the design of the Princess Royal class to create the Coronation class in 1937. The name of the class referred to the coronation of King George VI, an extremely significant event for Britain, which took place in 1937. The Coronation class was the most powerful class of steam locomotive ever used in Britain, with a tractive effort of 180 kilonewtons, even more than the British Railways 9F class. Like the Princess Royal class before them, they were intended for passenger express services on the Western Main Line. Stanier didn't design them with streamlining in mind. Seen here are the models that I have in 00 gauge and N gauge of unstreamlined locomotives of the Coronation class. These engines, especially the unstreamlined versions, are often referred to as Duchesses, leading to some confusion. There was never any separate Duchess class. All of the locos were Coronation class, Duchess being simply an informal designation since many later members of the class bore the names of Duchesses. So if Stanier didn't design the Coronation class with streamlining in mind, how did streamlined Coronation class locomotives come to be? Well, to understand that, we first have to consider the goings-on over with the LNER and their rival express trains on their East Coast main line. The LNER had been running Pacific locomotives for some time, with Nigel Gresley's A1 class dating back to 1922, before amalgamation, when Gresley was with the Great Northern Railway. In 1935, Gresley introduced the streamlined A4 class, as seen here. The LNER made great use of the A4 class, and the London to Scotland expresses drawn by that class in their marketing material. So successful was this that the senior management of the LMS collectively came to the conclusion that the LMS must have its own streamlined locomotives to match the rivals' A4s. Stanier resisted this, as he saw no likely engineering justification for adding streamlining to his Coronation class design. However, when the first of the class rolled out of the shed to cheers in 1937, it was indeed streamlined. The collective senior management decision prevailed. On its premier run with the Coronation Scot train out of Euston, several aeroplanes followed to film the Coronation's progress. And on that run, the train achieved a speed of 114 miles per hour, at that time setting the record speed for a British steam locomotive, and coming perilously close to crashing on the approach to Crewe due to the excessively high speed. As most of you probably know, that record didn't last long, being broken on July the 3rd, 1938 by the LNER's A4 locomotive Mallard, which achieved a speed of 126 miles per hour, confirmed by a dynamometer coach drawn behind the locomotive. Mallard was damaged in its record run, with bearing metal melting, and had to be taken out of service at Peterborough rather than continuing with the train to London. Nevertheless, Mallard had captured the record, and its feat was never surpassed, perhaps fortunately, although Gresley was apparently planning another attempt, hoping to exceed 130 miles per hour before war intervened in 1939. But for a while, the LMS Coronation class did hold the record, and the LMS made extensive use of the streamlined Coronation class locos and the special Coronation Scot train in their marketing materials. Normally, LMS passenger locos wore a deep red livery specified as Crimson Lake. This was inherited from the Midland Railway. However, for the Coronation Scot train, a special livery was introduced, blue lined with silver. And not only streamlined Coronation-class locomotives were finished in this livery, the blue colour and silver lining were continued for the whole train, with sets of coaches being specially finished for this train and only for this train. This picture is from an LMS publicity pamphlet of the time. It's pretty certain that the blue shown here is a lot deeper than that actually used on the train. Of course, it doesn't help that photographs from the time are all in black and white. Some forms of colour photography did already exist, but I have never seen a colour photograph of an original Coronation Scot train, or of a pre-war Coronation class locomotive. Here is a photograph from the time of the Coronation Scot train running. This train has 8 coaches drawn by the first locomotive of the class, Coronation. It wasn't uncommon for passenger trains on the Western Main Line to consist of 14 coaches or more, but the Coronation Scot was kept shorter to allow for greater speeds. In January 1939, a Coronation-class locomotive was shipped to the USA to take part in the New York World's Fair and undertake other exhibition duties. Seen here is that locomotive being lifted at the docks for loading. The locomotive sent was numbered and badged as 6220 Coronation, but it was in fact the engine originally numbered 6229 and named Duchess of Hamilton. The locomotive and its train are seen here on tour in Connecticut. It has been fitted with a headlamp and a bell, as required on US railways at the time. The train was shipped to the USA with a number of coaches. World War II broke out before the train could be returned to the UK. The engine itself was eventually shipped back via an Atlantic convoy in 1942. The coaches remained in the USA until after the war. Here's a contemporary illustration showing something of the internal makeup of the Coronation class. The streamlining added considerable weight to the locomotives and made almost all maintenance tasks, large and small, considerably more difficult to accomplish. On the other hand, the streamlining offered very little operational benefit, none in fact except at very high speeds. As a result of this, unstreamlined members of the class were put into service, starting with the Duchess of Buccleuch, built in 1938. And all of the locomotives built with streamlining eventually had the streamlining removed between 1946 and 1949. I haven't been able to find any photographs showing the streamlining being added or removed. This photograph of Coronation shows the front of the streamlining open to reveal the smoke box door. This opening, of course, was a routine procedure. And in this photograph, the smoke box door itself has been opened, which of course it would have to be to remove ash. Although all of the streamlined Coronation-class locomotives had their streamlining removed in the 1940s, it is still possible to see a streamlined Coronation-class loco, as streamlining was added back to the Duchess of Hamilton in preservation for historical recreation purposes. This was done around 2009, I believe. That locomotive is now generally found on display in the National Railway Museum in York, as seen here. This is the Hornby train set that I purchased. This set dates from 2012. It represents the silver-lined blue livery of the Coronation Scot train, with the original Coronation loco, number 6220, and 3 coaches in the special silver-lined blue livery. Hornby have also made Coronation Scot coaches in gold-lined crimson livery. However, this doesn't represent much of a historical fact. Certainly the LMS never ran trains in the UK with special gold-lined crimson coaches like this. Later streamlined Coronation-class locos were finished in gold-lined crimson, but those locos ran with standard LMS crimson coaches with no special gold lining. Hornby also sold a Coronation Scot train pack with gold-lined crimson loco and coaches. As noted, no such train ever ran in Britain, although it does appear that some form of gold lining may have been applied to the coaches sent to the USA with the rebadged Duchess of Hamilton. This train pack from Hornby, on the other hand, is quite accurate with respect to operations in Britain, as it features a gold-lined Coronation-class loco together with coaches finished in the standard LMS crimson livery. So a train like this may well have been seen running, albeit only briefly before war intervened later in 1939. Other than silver-lined blue and gold-lined crimson, the only additional livery known to have been used on Streamlined Coronation class locos is wartime black. There is some possibility that a loco might have been temporarily finished in photographic grey, but this can't be confirmed. In any case, that livery wouldn't have been worn in regular service. The engines were refinished in black during World War II due to wartime exigencies. Hornby have released versions of their models in the wartime livery as seen here. I don't have one of these. I stick with pre-war LMS operations. If you did want to model wartime operations, you'd pretty much need to completely devote a layout just to that, as many things, of course, changed during wartime. So, after all that history, back to my models and running them. These are the coaches that came with the 2012 train pack sitting on the box for that pack. There are 2 first-class corridor coaches with different numbers, and a third-class brake coach. I did also have a couple of other coaches in the silver-lined blue Coronation Scot livery. I picked these up locally here in Canada. Here are the ends of the boxes for those coaches. The older one must date from quite a while ago, as it's stamped Made in Great Britain on the bottom. Here are my 2 extra coaches out of their boxes. The older one is at top. They seem to be very similar, except that the older one has an LMS roundel that is not printed quite as nicely as those on the later models. Here are the bottoms of all 5 coaches. There isn't a lot of difference between them, suggesting that Hornby hadn't changed the tooling much over the years. However, Hornby have since released another version of the Coronation Scot train, which I believe does feature new coach tooling, but I haven't seen that. These coaches that I have all feature the older style of bogies with wide couplings built into the bogies, no NEM pockets. On the left is the loco that came with the train pack, and on the right is a model from 1984 which I purchased as an alternative and to see how it's running compared to the more recent models. My intention was to use the loco from the 2012 train pack for the running in this video, so long as it worked okay, but I got the 1984 model ready to serve as a backup. Fortunately, I managed to complete the running session with the 2012 loco with only minor problems. So the many hours of work that I've spent trying to get the more recent Hornby models of this class of loco to run seem to have paid off. See parts 143, 144 and 149 of this series for details of all that. Obviously the 2012 model is more detailed in many ways than that from 1984. See for example all of the small parts fitted at the front of the body. For some reason the 1984 model features 2 holes in what appear to be the double chimney fairing, whereas the 2012 model has a hole only in front with the back being closed flat. I'm honestly unclear about the history behind that. It does appear that the original Coronation class locos had only a single blast pipe, so why were they fitted with what appears to be a double chimney fairing? If you know the answer to this, please post in the comments below. The newer model has more detail further back also, with separately fitted handrails around the cab and tender and separately fitted safety valves and whistle, apparently made of metal. The finish of the 1984 model is very shiny, whereas the 2012 version has a dull satin finish. The greater detail continues on the back of the tender of the 2012 version, as would be expected. There's nothing very much in the cab of either version, but then the interior of the cab can't really be seen. Here are the pony truck and the back driving wheel of the 2012 version. And for comparison, here is the same area on the 1984 model. The representation of the pony truck is definitely more accurate on the newer model. This old version looks superficially believable, but it isn't actually very accurate. The driving wheels show black axles on the 2012 version and silver axles on the 1984 version. I'm rather doubtful as to whether either of these is really accurate. It's hard to tell in old black and white photographs, but the restored Duchess of Hamilton seems to show axles of a goldish colour with holes in their centre. I railed the 2012 model of the locomotive up on my Hornby layout along with 4 coaches, the 3 from the train pack and the nicer of my 2 additional coaches. All of these coaches had different running numbers. 1069, 1070 and 1071 for the first class coaches, and 5812 for the brake. I did have some initial problems running the train with this locomotive model, chiefly because the coupling on the back of the tender kept falling off, leading to the coaches detaching and derailing. The problem was that the NEM pocket just didn't fit into its slot on the tender at all tightly. In fact, it had fallen off in the box when I first got the set. I pushed it home as best as I could, but it still kept falling off. Here you can see the end of the NEM pocket and the slot into which that is supposed to fit. The problem was that when that triangular piece on the end of the NEM pocket went into the slot on the tender chassis, it wasn't a snug fit, and so it would just work loose and fall out. I didn't want to really glue it permanently in place, so I resorted to using some tack glue. I wiped away the excess and then pushed the fitting of the NEM pocket home. I let the glue dry for half an hour before trying again to run the train, and the coupling did stay in place for the rest of my running. So now let's see some running of this train. Okay, let's see if I can get this Coronation Scot train running for you. That's the latest loco, the 2012 one, which I hope I've fixed the derailing problems with now. I've had it round quite a few times without derailing. The 3 coaches on the back are the 3 that came with it in the train pack, and then I've got 1 extra in front, which has a different running number, so they've all got different running numbers. That's 1069, 1070 and 1071, and I forget what the brake is. The brake's like 5 something. It's noticeable that the roof on the extra coaches are rather lighter colour. In fact, actually, even the blue is perhaps a bit lighter on it, but the roof's very obviously lighter. But anyway, I've had my problems with this train already. I've been trying to run it, tried to get it to the point where it was basically railed properly and running before I turned the camera on. First time round, the back 2 coaches came uncoupled. Second time round, the coupling fell off the back of the tender. The coupling on the back of the tender is not a very good fit. I mean, it's not so much that, it's the whole NEM pocket that falls off. The NEM pocket has that little sort of angled bit that fits into a thing on the tender, and it's not a very firm fit. It had fallen off in the box when the thing came, and it's rather prone to falling off. I really don't particularly want to glue it in, but it does seem to keep falling off. And then the third time round, the tender derailed, but that was probably because I didn't get it railed properly after I fixed the problem with the coupling. But I have had it round a couple of times now, so we'll see what we can do with it. We'll give it some power. That's about 60% power, so for an express engine it's not geared all that high. It seems particularly susceptible to the variance in voltage. It gets slow around the far side where it's further from the power connection, and then speeds up when it gets to the power. The power connection's near me, basically about there. That's where it's going over the power connection, and it's rather obviously gets faster there, more so than most locos. I mean, yes, it's something you expect with, and that coupling's fallen off again, I think. That will be because the coupling's fallen off again. So I guess I'm going to have to do something about gluing that coupling in place, because it's ridiculous if the coupling keeps falling off the back of the tender. Okay, so I've glued the NEM pocket on the tender in place with a bit of tack glue, which will hopefully stop it falling off all the time. And I've left that for about 30 minutes to dry. Hopefully 30 minutes should be enough for that glue to dry. So let's see if we can actually get the train to run without something falling apart now. We'll see. I don't know how optimistic I am, but we'll see. There we go, that's about 60% power again, as I was saying before. I don't mind. Oh, I bent that fence out the way, but now it's gone back in again. The loco is just clipping the fence on the corner there as it goes by. That's what that little clip is. Hopefully that won't actually cause a problem, but they didn't do it that time. It's very noticeable how much faster it goes when it passes over where the power is connected. You know, I mean, I know there's going to be a voltage drop to the far corner there, but you don't notice it very much with most engines, but it's quite noticeable, very noticeable with this one. I guess it's a bit noticeable with a lot, but it's more noticeable with this one. Still, it is going. Now this has lots of pickups. You certainly can't complain about the pickup of this one. This has 12 wheel pickups. All 6 loco driving wheels pick up, all 6 tender wheels pick up. So you would not expect any pickup problems with this. I'll clip the fencing in there. I wonder if I can slow it down just a little bit. The problem is it's going to get very slow around the back there if I do it. I mean, it is an express, of course, but it's just easier to look at it if I slow it down a bit more. Look at some of the coaches as they go by. I did put 4 coaches on this. I usually only run 3 coach trains because the platforms on my station will really only hold 3 coaches. But since I had a couple of extra blue Coronation Scot coaches, I thought I might as well try and run them on this. Well, this has been a long effort for me, especially mainly trying to get the loco to run. But I do finally have a Coronation Scot train running. There you go, with 3 first-class carriages and a third-class brake. That's basically what they are. I guess they didn't, on a premier train like this, they didn't expect a lot of third-class passengers. I think I'm going to actually stop it here. There you go. So, finally, the streamlined Coronation Scot running, well, somewhat as it would have done in 1937, except of course it would have had a lot more coaches than this, but I can't really usefully run a lot more coaches than this. There we are. Okay, a little bit of sort of bonus footage. Since I already had the 1984 model ready, and also since I had one more coach I hadn't run, I decided I would rail up a train with a 1984 coach. So I've got the 2012 coach there on the inner loop. I might add that I actually ran it across there. I didn't pick it up and put it there. I actually drove it there across the points, and in its form as now modified after I've mucked around four times I lost count with various bits of it, it actually ran across the points and onto the second radius loop without a problem, the 2012 version. I haven't actually tried really running it much on the second radius loop, but anyway, so now I've got the 1984 version railed up on the third radius loop, and I did change the coach as well. Famous last words, because it's not going, because it has rather iffy pickups. This is the problem with the 1984 version. Have I got the right... Oh, now I'm pulling it off the tracks, I think. Oh dear. I derailed it. I was trying to poke it, and I derailed it. I derailed its driving wheels when I was poking it. Oh, and then it stopped on the points. Yes, I mean, the point is this is not a very good runner because of its pickup problems. Now let's see if I can poke it here. Out. Yeah. I mean, it never derailed. It never derailed. I derailed it then by poking, but it's never derailed itself in running. But it only picks up from two loco wheels on one side and not terribly well either there, so it really struggles to get over the points, etc. What I wanted to do is just have a look at the coaches if I can here. See those two on the back are the ones that came with the train pack from 2012. The one at the front is one from, I don't know quite when, it's from China, made in China, but slightly different. It has a lighter coloured roof, but it still has brown interior fittings. That is the one that I have, the oldest one, the one that was made in Great Britain. And it has an even lighter coloured roof, and its interior fittings, the walls of its compartments and the seats, are white, whereas the other three all have brown interior fittings. But anyway, I thought I'd put that in. It has the same number as the one I replaced with it, 1070. So the numbers of the coaches are the same as for the train before, but it's just like I've got two versions of 1070, as it were. Okay, let's see if I can get this to go around again. As I say, it's going to hesitate probably. We'll run at slightly more express speed to try and avoid its hesitations. Still slowed down markedly over the points, but it's going to, I'm afraid. There's not much more I can do about the pickups of this unless I actually modified it to add pickups myself. It just doesn't have quite enough pickups, really. Especially on the one side where it picks up on the low coast. It's tender driven, this one, for a ring-filled motor and a tender. So every time it goes over those points there, it slows down. Of course, it seems to be slowing down a bit through the station, which is, of course, in a sense makes sense, but I think it's just because there's a bit of dirt on the trucks. The area by the station seems to be a particularly vulnerable area to getting dirt. Oh, well, there you go. There's the 1984 Coronation Scot running. Let me see if I can stop him by the other version without him. There we go. Without him stopping where I don't want him to stop. So, there you go.